According to Wikipodric, significant Irish gods. Bollocks, god of frustration. The Encyclopedia of Irish Deities states, the devotees of the god Bollocks believe that, if in a moment of frustration you take his name in vain, then something even more irritating will be generated. They believe that this is what held Ireland back for so many generations. The wife of Bollocks is Feck, sometimes spelt and pronounced with a U in place of the E. She has equal powers, but they are subtly different. Some consider her influence to be worse, as the events that generate from her invocation tend to be more a fait accompli, in the manner of the French god of that name. Dastardly though Bollocks' interventions are, they tend to leave the victim with a tiny element of positivity, a belief that they could and should do something about what has happened. However, attempts to take remedial action often involve the victim involuntarily invoking the mischievous god by name again, resulting in additional frustration. Whereas Feck disciples are usually more fatalistic and accepting that nothing they can action will result in anything worthwhile. During his 27 years on the planet, Murphy had frequently invoked the interference of both gods, Bollocks and Feck. Well, less so in the first dozen years. He didn't understand at the time, but Ma and Da were obviously aware of the consequences of invoking OB and OF, and sought to protect him from invoking harm by chastising him if he ever uttered either god's name. This confused the young Murphy, as he frequently heard his parents, in unguarded moments, do as they had commanded him not to. As Murphy drifted aimlessly into his teens, Ma and Da's influence on him waned, and the frequency of his own invocations rose, with the inevitable consequences on his life. The easier days of his childhood gave way to the inevitable frustrations that he has experienced ever since on the short cycle of invocation and consequences. It took Murphy years to even recognise the cycle. This wasn't helped by his agnosticism to OB and OF, and indeed all the other minor gods, both Irish and from otherwheres. Eventually, he could ignore it all no more. After a particularly long sequence of frustrating and detrimental events, he had had enough. I will not go into the details here, as the cycle, or rather cycles, ran over a period of 18 months, and telling would distract from the main purpose of this narration. Enough to say that they started with mainly OB episodes, but towards the end OF consequences dominated. Murphy had to do something. His attempts at abstinence failed miserably. The habits of invocation were too deeply ingrained. He tried the priest, but the Reverend Father ordered him out of the confession box for uttering such profanities in God's house. Murphy's drinking pals just laughed. However, in the end, he did find one understanding pair of ears, Stab the Rasher, his old pal since school. Although not exactly the same, their experiences had brought them to similar conclusions. Murphy discovered that his own mucker, the Rasher, had been observing the minor gods for longer than he had, so he therefore had a deeper understanding and a broader knowledge of some of the other minor gods at play. While preparing tea for both of them, Stab explained, "Do you know that O'Boyle is the god of kettles?" "No, but it makes sense." "Or that Overt is the god of everything green?" "Well, now I do." "Or Odin is the god of all noises, except for thunder. That's the domain of his son." "I did not know that until you said it." "Did you know that there is no Irish god of good luck?" "Explains a lot." And what about Oblique, god of moors and mountain tops?
Well, I never. Sorry, Stab. I'm going to have to stop you there. All this new information is overwhelming, and I already feel depressed.
Depressed, Spud? What you need is a holiday. Somewhere far away. Somewhere exotic, maybe. Maybe the reach of the Irish gods weakens the further you go.
Do you think?
Maybe. I don't know for sure. I've never tested it myself.
How so?
I've never been overseas.
Oh, right. Now you come to mention it, I have felt more relaxed when abroad. That time in Fuerteventura, or the week in Heraklion. You might have a point there, Stab.
I'm sure I do. It makes sense.
But where can I go? I'm stony broke after the shenanigans of the last year and a half.
Well, let's see now. Joxer has a place in Alanya. But I think he is out there himself, and a couple of weeks in Joxer's company might do you more harm than good. What about Boris? He has a villa in Vietnam. Hard to get much further away from Ireland than that. He probably won't be there himself. It's the rainy season. But you won't mind that, will you? Just take a waterproof with you. Light a candle there to old Owen, the god of borrowing and lunch, and I'll give Boris a shout. To Murphy's great surprise and delight, O'Lone came up trumps, as did Orion, god of cheap flights, and after just 4 busy days, Murphy found himself staring up at a star-filled sky while lying on a lilo and sipping a concoction prepared from plum fruits. Oh yes, this is the life. A few days of this, and I will venture outside, see what goes on the streets of Hanoi. On Thursday, Murphy decided to risk the heavy rain showers. Not knowing the place, he placed his fate in the hands of Auberge, French god of inns, and wandered into the first drinking establishment he came across. He found himself sipping a Hanoi margarita in Clou Bar. There was a band playing over-cheery sunshine music that Murphy hated. Suddenly, there was a woman wriggling onto the stool next to his. Pretty. As she ordered a drink, Murphy noticed that there were many vacant stools all along the bar. Nah, doesn't work like that. Not for me. Once the barman had retreated, Murphy, from the corner of his left eye, watched her take a long draw on the straw emanating from the pink liquid in her glass. To his surprise, she turned her face towards him and spoke.
You are staying in Boris-in-Ossory.
What? Oh, yes, the villa, yes.
You are a friend of Boris?
Yes. How do you know?
Boris only lets friends stay there.
Oh, right, too. What is your name, if you don't mind me asking?
Eliza.
Your name doesn't sound very Vietnamese.
It is a special name. It was given to me by Boris. Boris could never pronounce my real name, Phu Ong. What is your name, if you don't mind me asking?
She smiled sweetly at her own little joke.
Spud to my friends. So do you know Boris well?
Yes, well, we first met 5 years ago.
Right. A long time then. Did you learn to speak English from him?
Yes, why?
Because you speak it with a Dublin accent.
Do you like this music?
No, hate it.
So do I. We can go somewhere else if you want.
Yes, let's do that.
Eliza and Murphy visited 3 other establishments that night. They had cocktails under a large umbrella at the Sky Bar, sang along off-key at the Blues Bar, and danced slow in the Hay Bar. Back at the gates of Boris-in-Ossory, they kissed in the rain and parted. Oh, Higgins, god of fair ladies, you are smiling on me at last. True, they didn't get to shag each other that night, as he had desired, but he felt contented, and the need to invoke OB never entered his mind. The shagging started on night 3. Murphy says it was the best he ever had, or has had since. No more details than that. He didn't want any of this to stop. He didn't want to go home to cursed Ireland, but built 3 shrines and adorned them with candles and incense from the local market. One was to O'Kane, god of sweetness. in thanks for Eliza's nature and the effect it was having on him. The second shrine was to O'Fay, the god of familiarity, for Murphy fervently wanted his experiences with Eliza to be for the rest of his life. And the third shrine was to Ovid, god of omelettes, as following a severe bout of Viet belly, that was all he could eat and still function. During the day, he prayed frequently and lit candles to each of his chosen deities. The night before his return flight, Eliza sat up in bed.
Sorry, Spud, me love, but I gotta go.
No, my love, why?
My family, my daughter's unwell. I'll have to tend to her.
Onus, god of obligation, strikes again.
No, stay, my love. Your mother is there. I leave tomorrow.
Sorry, Spud, but I must go.
They rose and walked to the bifold doors.
But it's raining cats and dogs, Eliza. You'll get soaked.
Just rain and water. That doesn't matter. I have to go.
Eliza stepped out into the rattle of the steady downpour.
Wait. At least take my waterproof. It is guaranteed against the Dublin rain, but I'm not sure about this.
Murphy pulled her back, fetched his waterproof jacket, and took pleasure from fitting her into it. He then kissed her long, before watching her depart through the automatic gates of Boris and Ossory. The next day, Murphy packed for departure with a heavy heart, regularly glancing at the gate. He reminded himself that they had only ever met in the evenings, but it didn't help. As he was loading his luggage into the taxi, Eliza appeared, carrying his jacket. They kissed.
I suppose we don't have time for a shag.
She joked. Both laughed. Eliza waved him off with sadness in her eyes. Murphy was also all too aware of the heavy hand of O'Pine, god of conifers and separation. Within minutes, the fingers of O'Bollocks were back in his life. The cab got stuck in heavy traffic. As the minutes ticked over into an hour, Murphy managed, with great effort, to avoid involuntarily invoking OB. When he finally got to the airport, his flight was already being called. Despite an unwelcome intervention from O'Fence, god of barriers and umbrage, Murphy scrambled sweating profusely and panting aboard the aircraft and found his seat. After the meal, that he consumed little of, as O'Pine had trampled his appetite, he fell asleep thinking of Eliza. He awoke as the plane was coming into land.
I regret to inform you that due to industrial action at Heathrow Airport, we have been diverted to Stansted Airport. When you arrive in the terminal building, you will need to contact your travel company to arrange alternative onward travel. We apologise for any inconvenience caused, but this has been unavoidable. Please have your travel documents ready for inspection.
Oh, bollocks, I'll miss my connecting flight. In the baggage hall, there was more bad news. Before leaving Hanoi, Murphy had offered up a brief prayer to Omit, god of failing to include things. As it turned out, his prayer to Omit had been answered, and his luggage had been loaded into the hold. But unfortunately, into the hold of the wrong aircraft. It had gone from Hanoi to Cairo instead of London. I'd have been better off imploring O Hanlon, the god of luggage travelling between Hanoi and London. The good news was that a coach had been laid on to take the passengers to Heathrow, and by the time they got there, the industrial action would be over. A seat on a later connecting flight to Dublin had also been arranged for Murphy. However, in order to avail of the transport, he and the other passengers would have to go through the immigration and customs. Of course, the interference of the god O'Fence meant that he was singled out for detailed attention and examination.
No bother. My luggage is in Cairo anyway.
We still need to search your personal belongings. Please empty your pockets into the tray and pass your jacket to my colleague here. Murphy did as directed, then stood with his arms outstretched for the body search. You are going to have to come with us, Mr. Murphy.
But I'll miss the shuttle bus.
Sorry. Oh, bollocks. In the hour that followed, sitting alone in the windowless room, with only the hum of the air conditioning for company, Murphy gave up the struggle and mentally invoked O'Bollock several times. Eventually, the customs officers returned, their expressions full of barely restrained excitement. The original lining of your jacket has been removed and replaced with packets of a powder. Our considerable experience here leads us to suspect this may be an illegal substance. So what do you have to say about that, Mr. Murphy?
Oh, shite.